For those of you who might not know me, my name's David McCready. I'm the CEO of the Australian British Chamber of Commerce. It's great to be back for 2023. I'd like to just start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands, wherever you may be joining us from around Australia. I'm in Sydney on Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that to not only any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders joining us today, but to the elders past and present around the country, and acknowledge their ongoing connection with their culture for over 60,000 years, but also to this land. But we're going to talk about something which isn't land-based necessarily today in education that can be portable and anywhere. And it's great to have Alexander Cork joining us. The session this afternoon is in partnership with his organisation called the Crimson Global Academy. And the session title today is Creating Flexibility for Staff, Clients and Their Families. We're in for a pretty interesting conversation, actually, and Alex and I were just talking prior to coming online formally this afternoon, and it's a really interesting business proposition that they've got, and a great proposition, particularly for families, particularly for those people who move around the place from time to time. I'll introduce Alex from Crimson Global Academy shortly, who'll explain how to integrate family flexibility into the employment benefits, into your programs and client services. After the presentation, I'll moderate a Q&A discussion. There's a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen if you're on your laptop. It'll be elsewhere and by now I think we're all so familiar with Zoom. Hopefully you know where to find that on your device. And please feel free to put questions in at any time during the presentation, and we'll come back, as I say, at the end to answer any of those questions that you may have. So what is Crimson Global Academy? Just quickly, because Alex is obviously going to tell you far more about it than I need to, but it's Australia's leading online high school education with over 1,000 plus students across 30 countries, teaching the international A-levels in small classes. CGA students enrolled by ability rather than age, and join classes either in the APAC time zone or European time zones. So to introduce Alex to you, Alex worked in education for over a decade. He just told me he's an education nerd, so he's got plenty to give us, and so fire away with all your questions. And has given talks for more than 100 schools around Australia, New Zealand and parts of Asia. He's the Senior Admissions Officer at Crimson Global Academy and the host of the Top of the Class podcast. Alex enjoys helping parents and students make their informed decisions to navigate the complex education landscape. With that, Alex, I'll pass over to you, and look forward to your presentation and the great discussion that we'll have at the end.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the introduction, David, and welcome everybody to the first ABCC webinar of the year. I'm really delighted to be with you all here. As David did a fantastic welcome there and covered quite a few of the basics of CGA, but essentially we're going to be talking about how CGA helps with creating flexibility for your staff and for your potential clients. I'll give a little bit of a case study as well of a current business, another British Chamber member that we are currently working with at the moment. And hopefully, if you're interested at all in providing a little bit more flexibility to your staff and clients, I'll kind of give you an idea of how we can do that at CGA. But to kick things off, I just thought I'd show this quick video. This is one of our deputy principals, Dr. Andrew Daniels, who is based over in the UK, and he explains a little bit about what CGA is.
Welcome to Crimson Global Academy, a global online high school that sets students on an accelerated path to success. Learn from expert teachers in small, live and interactive classes alongside classmates from all over the world. Study to your ability, not your age, with no limit on the number of classes you can take. Explore subjects that your school doesn't offer and build your academic profile. Learn how to code or to create 3D games. Join exciting extracurriculars like Model United Nations, the Investment Club, the Economic Society, or the Student Newspaper. Get a glimpse of the real world with access to internships with top companies like Uber, HSBC, PwC, and Denton's Law. Study an international curriculum. Progress at a speed that fits your ambition. At CGA, the opportunities are endless. Get ready to stand out on the world stage. Join us, your global classroom awaits.
Wonderful. So I hope that whets your appetite a little bit for what the potential of online schooling really has become. Ever since, I guess, COVID, the leap in online education was about 5 years, roughly, in terms of just the amount of investment. And the plan was for Crimson Education, which is the parent company, to always start an online school. And I guess the pandemic hurried that through a little bit. And since then, we've become the fastest growing school in the Southern Hemisphere. And one of the reasons why we became a member with the Australian British Chamber of Commerce is mainly because I was just speaking to so many British families, British expats, who wanted to have the option of continuing their child's education in the A-levels, which is what we do. So we teach the international A-levels, which is, I guess, based on the A-levels and the IGCSE that you would see in the UK. And the fact that, if they wanted to go back to the UK, they would have that option of studying in UK universities with their A-level scores. And basically the ATAR system here in Australia was just not making much sense to many UK families that were coming across. So that's why we thought it would be a great partnership to be a part of the British Chamber of Commerce. But today I wanted to focus on creating flexibility for staff, clients, and their families, and how we can help do that at CGA. So essentially, we'll go through the companies that are leading the way, schools post-COVID, why Brits and expats come to CGA, creating flexibility with CGA, and a little bit of a Q&A as well. So firstly, I just wanted to focus on a couple of the companies that are really leading the way in flexibility. And a couple of these companies I'm sure you'd be very familiar with, and you will see a little bit about their policies there as well. Atlassian, which has Team Anywhere, which basically only requires staff to attend an office 4 times a year. 3M, which is the work your way, which really has a trust-based approach. Airbnb says, this is from their CEO, the best people live everywhere, not concentrated in one area. And by recruiting from a diverse set of communities, we will become a more diverse company. And you'll see one there from HubSpot. But the one I really like from Dropbox as well, because it translates a lot to what we see from students, high school students, is that workers are more focused at home and just as engaged as before. In our internal surveys, most employers say they're able to be productive at home nearly 90% and don't want to return to a rigid 5-day in-office work week. And that's a considerable portion of the students who come to CGA is just because they really quite enjoyed learning online and were actually often more productive than they were at school. So you can see here a little bit of a Gallup poll from 2022 and just the huge preference towards either exclusively remote or at least maybe some kind of hybrid model between home and office. And only 6% of people keen to go back to on-site. And it's contrasted with, I guess, what we'll see at schools. But essentially, I'd love to know from you, if you can leave in the chat, how important is flexibility to your company or clients? So flexibility has become such a big part of how companies attract new staff or retain staff or attract clients potentially or retain clients. So I'd love to know from you, is it the most important thing? Is it somewhat important? Is it not very important? If you could let us know in the chat, how important is flexibility to your company or clients or to your staff as well? Do you often have staff being like, I wish I could work from home, or I wish I could work from wherever I wanted to, time zone permitting, obviously. So let us know in the chat, and we'd love to see if indeed flexibility is important to your company or clients. But when we, as I said, contrast that with what's happening at schools, as soon as restrictions lifted, schools went back to full-time face-to-face. When you compare that to what companies were doing, where pretty much all of them had some kind of, work from home ability, if possible, very much schools went back to full-time face-to-face very, very quickly, which often ties families to a school location. So whilst families have really wanted to do, sea changes, tree changes, travel internationally potentially, very much the school is often the thing that's tying a family to their respective city or where their home is, what it might be. And so what we're seeing is a lot of a new, I guess, term that you may not be familiar with is something called school refusal. So basically children basically saying, I don't want to go to school. I prefer learning online, which is an increasing issue. And also, I guess, in conjunction with that, homeschool registrations in Australia have gone up by as much as 40+% in some states. So at CGA, families register as a homeschool family, basically because we're teaching an international curriculum, not the VCE or anything like that. But as a result, homeschool registrations have really dramatically increased as students often preferred learning online. But yes, a very big contrast to what you would often see in the workplace. So what it's really coming down to is physical schools are often the limiting factor in terms of flexibility for both staff and clients. So the main thing that's tying a lot of your staff and potentially a lot of your clients to a set location is the school that their children attend, right? And so if you want your children to, your staff or your clients to have that flexibility, that's where CGA can come in and provide that flexibility and hopefully help you retain your staff and help you add more staff and clients in the long term. So this is why Brits and expats in particular come to CGA. Of course, some of these are relevant to the wider audience, not just Brits and expats, but definitely we see this when we're speaking to our British friends, is that they want to travel more, whether that be adventures, basically educational adventures with their kids, traveling outside of the school holidays, or very commonly traveling or relocating for work. So we see a lot of families come to Australia for a year or more. They're there before their work and they'll go back to the UK eventually, but they want something in the interim that aligns with what the school was doing in the UK, or they want a curriculum that will transfer back to the UK system or to potentially Australian universities, Australian schools here. So they really love the fact that we're an international community. We have 1,000+ students from 37 countries. And those students are studying both full-time or part-time with us. So students can enroll in just 1 or 2 subjects if they want, but we see a lot of students enrolling full-time with us these days. The transcripts are accepted by physical schools everywhere. So if a student is, say, traveling for a bit and then going back to a physical school, that would be fine. And we are also specialists in international university admissions as well as Australian universities. So if you're looking for that support, a lot of people, a lot of families look for support to go to the UK. We definitely offer that. And then finally, this one is a big one, the familiarity of the A-levels. The number of parents I've spoken to, or UK-based parents, who say, can you explain this ATAR system to me? I cannot for the life of me work it out. You are not alone if that is is that familiar to you. We teach the international A-levels, so if you studied in the UK as a high school student, you'd probably be familiar with that, or the O-levels, roughly the same thing. A tricky curriculum, but is very academically rigorous. We have UK-based teachers, which you just saw in the video earlier. Very importantly, we have Northern and Southern Hemisphere timetables as well. So what that means is we have a school that starts in February for our Southern Hemisphere timetable, which will run to the academic year with exams in December. And then we have another school that runs from September through to May, which more closely mirrors, obviously, the UK timetable. So we have classes that happen in the school day here in Australia and classes that happen in the European time zone as well. We have recordings of every class, and we even do one-to-one classes for the ultimate in flexibility. So for families that are traveling a lot, that really require that flexibility to catch up or whatever it might be, they can do that with us at CGA. So very different to like your stock standard thing that a lot of parents saw during COVID, which was like joining a random online class with like all these blank screens and a teacher trying to figure out like who's there and who's not there. The CGA classes and the community is very adept at really getting the most out of the online format and making sure that we cater to their every need. And then, as of course, the university and admissions counselling that I mentioned quickly, a huge factor for students who want to study back in the US or, in fact, in the UK if your family's from that area. So we've had 176 plus offers to Oxford and Cambridge. Just had a student from rural New Zealand get admission to Oxford Medicine, which was very exciting. She was a part-time student with us who did 3 additional A-levels, which is a great success story. So how can you as a company, if you're here for your own family, that's great. If you're here representing your own kids, all good and well. But if you're here to basically represent your company or potentially your clients, this is a really great way to create that flexibility through either a family-friendly staff benefits program. So what we can do is we can create discounts for staff. If your company says, yep, we're going to recommend CGA to our staff as a way to create flexibility for particularly relocating families. So we know this is a very stressful process. Families are trying to figure out, which school is worth going to, which school has a waiting list. A lot of private schools have waiting lists as long as your arm. So we don't have any waiting lists because we can just grow as much as needed. We're not limited by physical classroom spaces. And it shows consideration for the family, not just the employee. And then from the client side of things, we can do discounts for referred clients, which can be on a commission structure. And what we see is a lot of businesses trying to become the one-stop shop for their clients. So essentially not just being in the one area that you might specialize in, say, for instance, accounting or setting up business or whatnot, basically catering to all the families or all the clients' needs. So when the client says, oh, we're wanting to invest in whatever it might be, you say, great, do you need any assistance with education as well? So we particularly see this with, Asian clients, and we also see this increasingly with clients from Europe as well. So I just thought I'd touch on a quick case study. I got the AOK from Polyglot today to mention the kind of quasi-partnership that we have with them at the moment, which is really great. Basically, in the last Meet the Member session of 2022, I heard from Jade, who works at Polyglot, what they roughly do, which is essentially helping businesses set up shop here in Australia. And I kind of saw that there would be a really easy way that we could assist, and reached out to her. We had a chat, and essentially she's going to be recommending CGA as a potential school for anyone who is relocating to Australia with kids or whatnot, to make that transition a little bit easier. And also it takes out the stress of having to find a house or having to find a private school with, or maybe a public, whatever school. Even a good public school means that nearby property prices are obviously going to be very high. A good private school means that not only the fees are high, but chances are nearby property prices are also very high. With CGA, if a family's relocating, they can live on the coast, live in a place that's a little bit cheaper, and still have their children attend a fantastic school. And we've got a lot of families in that situation, families that did tree change or sea change and wanted that, academic, they didn't want to have their kid fall by the wayside, academically speaking. They still wanted great teachers. They still wanted great attention, and so had their children join us at CGA. So it's been a really great thing to see families from around Australia adopt this way of learning. And from a social perspective, the school continues to grow and become a really great place for students of all ages and abilities. But we mainly work with students who are about 10 years old through till 18. So I'm happy to get into the Q&A side of things. I hope that gives you a rough idea of who we are and how we can help, particularly with regards to staff retention, client retention, as well as attracting new staff and new clients to your business by not just saying that you commit to flexibility, but you show that you commit to flexibility, not just for the staff or the clients, but for their families as well, which is a really great consideration that you'll be making for those families. So David, I think that about ends my presentation. Would love to hear some questions.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Alex. It's I think that was pretty comprehensive in a lot of ways. Looking forward to seeing some more comments and engagement in the chat. I note there was a comment there from Kim, I think, just saying, that's absolutely, definitely within the top 3 requirements of new recruits. And that last point you made really about, everybody's changed styles of living over the last couple of years due to COVID, and being able to have access wherever you are to the education that you want for your children is absolutely important.
Yeah.
Tell me, how does it work? I mean, if you make the choice and you go down this path, for some people, it's a permanent choice. So, they enroll quite young and they stay through the whole journey. But tell us about the flexibility from your end in terms of how does it work if I've just been offered a job in London for the next 12 months, year and a half, 6 months, whatever it might be.
Yep.
How can we engage? How does that actually pan out in terms of the process to get engaged with you guys?
Yeah, 100%. So the main thing that we have in terms of like the ultimate in flexibility, as I mentioned, is a one-to-one style of learning. So essentially they get paired up with an experienced instructor or teacher. Usually if the student's a little bit younger, we'd be just looking to plug gaps in, English, math, science, whatever they need really to keep them going at that stage, particularly if they're going, 3-6 months. It would be almost, not worth enrolling in a local school, essentially. You'd be wanting just to keep learning going and make sure that if they do transition back to a physical school, they're in a good place to do that ability-wise when they do. So the one-to-one format is very, very popular for international families with this kind of situation. For families who are enrolling or who know they're going to be traveling for a year or so, it might not necessarily be long enough to commit their child to a local school. It's a lot to get used to a social side of a school and all these things in a year. So in that respect, would probably encourage the student to join the classes where possible. The best thing about that is no matter where the kid is, where the family is, as long as they've got internet connection, they can join the classes. And so we'd be wanting them to probably, if they can maintain like a full school workload with us over that year-long period to make sure that they're keeping up and, everyone's happy, parents are happy because the kids are getting a great education. A lot of kids will join like, local soccer teams, local swimming clubs, or whatever like that to keep the extracurricular side going. But yeah, essentially we would probably encourage the classroom format if they've been anywhere for a year or more.
So just touching on that and sort of probably expanding, obviously they will have physical interactions in the local football club. You can't do that online. But tell us a bit about the social settings. I know that you talked about, Model UN and some of the other extracurricular activities. How do they work, and how does that social side of school life come to life in this circumstance? Particularly, obviously one-on-one classes is a slightly different construct, but that sort of classroom teaching, online classroom teaching that you're talking about, can you share a bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that I want to mention here is that a lot of families assume, it was funny, I was actually at an appointment recently, and the lady who was doing the appointment said, "Oh, what do you do for work?" I said, "I work for an online school. I'm an admissions officer for a virtual school." And she said, "Oh, that's sad." And I said, excuse me, how do you figure that's sad? She says, like, "But what about the social side?" And I said, well, the first thing that a lot of people assume is that for some reason, the social side of school is better than the social side of online. And in many cases, a lot of families that attend CGAs, because the social side at their school is not good. There could be bullies, or there could be, the student is introverted or has social anxiety or whatever it might be. So we have a lot of students who basically want to get away from the, physical school because it is overwhelming for them from a social perspective. And then in terms of like the CGA's social side, I often say to students, they could dial it up as much as they want. They can get involved in the school houses, get involved in school leadership, get involved in all the extracurriculars, come along to our physical meetups that we hold in major cities, arrange meetups with local families. We see a lot of students who, when they travel, they go and meet their CGA friends. So I had a student from Japan not too long ago who stayed with me when he's like a senior student, 17 years old, coming out to visit some of the unis here. And he went and saw all these CGA mates whilst he was here. So there's definitely like interesting ways that students engage on a global scale with students from all around the world. I often relate it to like, if you're a staff member who's working in a global company and you're primarily working from home, you'll still have your social interactions online with your colleagues, your managers, or whatever. But you're still going to be involved in a couple of external organizations and clubs and whatnot to have that face-to-face side. So the CGA families do very similar things.
I've got a question here from somebody who will remain nameless because they've named themselves admin on the Zoom. But the question is a really interesting one. In particular, they're very interested to understand if you offer geography at O level and A level, And I guess more broadly, have you got a list of subjects that you offer? Do
Yeah.
you offer everything under the sun?
Well, essentially, we can teach anything that is offered by either Cambridge A-levels, Pearson A-levels, or the College Board APs, which is a US-based curriculum. We can teach anything that's offered by those courses. Now, if there is a classroom format, we usually have the majority of mainstream subjects offered in the classroom format because we know we can fill those up. If the subject is a little bit more niche, that's when we would recommend the one-to-one format, because we know like we can find instructors and they can teach that student one-to-one in 50 hours. They can cover the full school curriculum. That's what we'll be doing for geography at the A-level side. At the IGCSE side, we'd be doing that through our environmental management course, which is offered through Cambridge. And that's kind of an updated version of geography. So that's what we teach in our classroom format at the IGCSE level. And for AS A2 level students, we would recommend the one-to-one geography course, which actually I've just got a student from New Zealand enrolling in that just this week.
And the same person's asked another question, which I'm fascinated to get the answer on. What happens when it comes to exam time? How does it sit? I mean, there's been a lot of discourse here in Australia, particularly over the last couple of weeks about AIs answering exam questions, which obviously makes it an interesting question, particularly. So, is there study centres that you go to for exams, or is it done online? How does that play out?
Yeah, so for IGCSE and above, they're all formal examinations and they all take place at physical examination centres. So we have examination centres here in Melbourne, in Sydney, and many other countries around the world will have, basically the more popular the A-levels are, the more they're offered in exam centres. So New Zealand has about 60 different A-level schools. So it's quite popular there, and across in obviously the UK, Singapore, Hong Kong, all have physical testing centres. So that's where our CGA students go.
So those are actually held and hosted by the education system from those countries rather than by Crimson Global Academy.
Oh, no, we are the proctor for a couple of examination centres here in Melbourne and Sydney. Look, we're not doing any funny business there. We're not like feeding the kids the answers or anything. I mean, our students do very, very well academically speaking. Academically speaking, we just surpassed the top ranked academic school in New Zealand, which was particularly pleasing for our principal, who used to be the deputy principal of that school. So he sees it as a good win. But essentially, we proctor the Melbourne and sometimes the Sydney ones. If the kids go to the British Council in Sydney to sit their exams, that's where they'll take them. Otherwise, they might go to our examination centres or offices around Melbourne and Sydney. And so we're looking to set up more in like Brisbane and Perth as well.
Brilliant. There's one other question that I wanted to ask before we go back to a couple of other questions that are coming in. You're giving people the option of different education systems effectively. How do you compare them, and what's the sort of criteria that parents are discussing with you about, I'd really like my kid to go to Oxford or Cambridge or Harvard or whatever, or other universities in those countries? We know that Australia is the third best tertiary education provider behind the US and the UK. I know it's been a little bit challenging over the last couple of years, but how do you assess, and do you help people to sort of look at where they should be focusing their efforts, I guess, and which course is best for them? Is it the HS or an Australian system? Is it a UK, US system? How do you balance that out?
Right. Well, the three main options here in Australia when you add the A-levels to it are the local curriculum, HSC, VCE, QCE, WACE, SACE, whatever you want to call it, as well as the IB. And so I think a lot of families will compare the IB to the A-levels. And when we were setting up the school, we had the option to be an IB school or to be an A-level school. And our academic principal, and when we say academic principal, our executive principal at CGA is John Morris, who introduced the A-levels to New Zealand in the 90s. And he was the principal at Auckland Grammar for about 30 years, has been an educator for 4 years. Yeah, like we're talking like one of the OG principals of private schools there in New Zealand. And he wanted us to be an A-level school for two reasons. Number one, in terms of international universities, they regard it very, very highly. But secondly, it is a little bit more flexible than the IB. The IB is very prescriptive in the way it recommends subjects to students. Students need to choose different subjects from different areas, whereas in the A-levels, you don't have that restriction. So for us, it was the better choice to give students more choice effectively, whilst being very academically rigorous. So when we say academically rigorous, as a rough kind of guide for national curriculum versus A-levels, some schools in Australia, some private schools in Australia use the IGCSEs as an advanced streaming class for year 10s. So if year 10s, if they're doing really well academically, they'll put them in a couple of the IGCSE programs to prepare them for year 11 and 12 because they see these kids doing really, really well academically. And it's the first time that the students will sit a formal examination in year 10. So it is definitely more challenging, academically speaking. We do assessments on students to make sure that we're putting them in classes that are a good fit for them. And we do work with like a lot of students who are academically advanced and maybe a little bit bored at school potentially. We actually meet a lot of families. Actually, it was funny. I met a family in New Zealand recently, British family, came to New Zealand, enrolled in a local school, local curriculum. Kid was super bored because she had already done all the work a year and a half ago in the UK. She was like, I'm learning things that I learned, back in 2021. And, they're saying it's new content for her year level in New Zealand. And similar thing happens to Australian kids coming from the UK to Australia. It can be boring because the UK curriculum is more advanced. So that's where we see a lot of families come to us and be like, my kid's bored at school and needs to go back to the British curriculum.
And I'm interested in that also on the basis you talked about, obviously, advanced kids and number of people who are quite bright. You talked about people who are, have other social challenges and anxieties, bullying, all those sorts of social constructs that you obviously avoid by having the opportunity to do it away from that sort of environment. I'm interested in you talked about the flexibility of it. How accelerated can the pathway be? I mean, just thinking of this the other day, I read a story about a 16-year-old who's off at university and being able to do some university study whilst finishing a couple of other subjects in the HSC next year when they should be in year 10 and they've already done 5 subjects. Crazy stuff. But I assume that this sort of format really allows you to provide them a really flexible opportunity to accelerate that learning progress if it works.
Yeah, we definitely have some pretty extraordinary kids who are doing some pretty interesting things with us, academically speaking. The main thing that we have to keep in mind is what is the end goal for the student. So not every university is overly keen to have 15, 16-year-olds running around on campus. So if that's the case and the student's on track to potentially graduate by the time they're 16, we'll tend to create a program for them that slows them down a little bit. So might include having 2 years of IGCSE, which is pretty common in the UK to do 2 years of GCSEs. So we might do that in our program as well. Effectively, they'll have a broader range of subjects, but they'll also be slowed down by a year. So they don't graduate when they are 15, 16, and universities will basically want them a little bit more because they are a little bit older. We tend to be able to accelerate students in specific subjects like maths or sciences a little bit more than, say, English, just due to maturity factors. Pretty common student at CGA is like a bored year 7 or 8 who is learning year 10 or 11, maths or science, and is like, school is no good. So, they come to us because we are an ability not age school. We don't put as many restrictions on that nearly as you would see in a physical school.
You touched on science there. Mm-hmm. I remember, needing to get out the Bunsen burner and the chemistry sets and all those sorts of things. How do you manage that when I'm living at home? Quite frankly, I don't know about others. I don't have a Bunsen burner at home.
I was going to ask, No. I don't have one either, which is completely fine. We use a lot of really great simulators for students in chemistry, physics, bio, this type of thing. We also do an in-person science day or science mini camp in a way for students who are particularly based in New Zealand or who want to come across to our New Zealand teachers We would love to do a bit more of that here in Australia, and as our numbers grow here in Australia, that's likely to happen as well. But yeah, effectively, like I can borrow from a current student of ours based in Melbourne who left a private girls' school to join CGA. She does physics, bio, and chem with us, and she said from her perspective, she learns more in depth and faster with CGA than she was in the physical school, because as you mentioned with the Bunsen burners, it kind of makes sense that that's an important thing, but in reality, most kids spend at least 60 or 70% of that class stuffing around. The Bunsen burners are, with the goggles and the lab coats and the chemicals and whatnot, it can be often like, hey, what was that class about? And kids will be like, oh, I can't really remember. I was just playing around with things. So she said, like, in terms of the actual understanding of chemistry, physics, bio, she gets a lot more out of the CGA experience than she was in a physical lab.
Cool. Just turning back to sort of the parent experience and thinking about the sort of partnerships that you've got with some of the clients that you talked about. Thank you for mentioning a whole bunch of our clients as clients of yours, and using the polyglot example as your case study today. How does the partnership work, and how do you roll that out as an employee benefit as a company? What's the process around building that relationship with you?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is to reach out. If company sees that potential to help their clients, help their staff, if they reach out to us, I would try and customize it a little bit for them. Whether it's better understanding who likely is going to take this up. Is it someone immediate that we can talk to straight away, or is it something that they're going to want to integrate into their employee benefits or client benefits programs for the foreseeable future? Then I think we'd try and tailor the messaging a little bit to the company, and maybe do like I think what we did with Polyglot was create a co-branded flyer. Just co-branded information wherever it suits the current communication portals of the company. And then from there, we'll look at creating a bit of a discounted rate for members, particularly of, British Chamber members, British Chamber member clients as well. We'd look to offer a discount there because, we like to help out our expat friends from all around the world. So we'd be offering that discount. And then as long as people mention that relationship during the admissions process, we'll be able to honor that 10% discount there.
Brilliant. I've got a question here from Fred. Welcome, welcome back, Fred. Good to see you online with us today. He's asking the important question of what's the pricing model? Is it competitive? Is it more expensive? What does it feel like to? I think we were talking earlier. I've got 10 years of private school fees left in my life. What does it feel like in terms of prices and there's obviously odds and sods around travel and other things that people will have to take if they're coming to the camps and the group settings that you've talked about. But what's the baseline? Tell us.
Baseline for full-time as a pre-IG, which is kind of our year 8-9 equivalent, all the way through to ASA2 level, is $24,000 a year. For classes, and then we have a $2,500 annual fee for covering things like university counselling, these types of things. So yes, it is equivalent to roughly kind of like a mid to high tier private school that you would see here in Australia. The main benefits though is that in terms of class size, we're about half the size of classes that you'll see in even elite private schools here in Australia. So our average is around 7 to 10 students per class. We hire, some of the best teachers from around the world, which is where the majority of the cost comes from. We're not restricted by the teachers in a 10, 15 kilometer radius. We can literally go out and hire some of the best teachers in the world. And then we have a whole lot of tech on the back end, whether it be the science simulators or our parent portal or all these types of things. The accreditation to be a both Pearson and Cambridge school, as well as an AP school. So all these different elements, they do add up, but essentially the quality of the education, the scores that our students receive, justifies that cost. And it is, a private online school, and our fees do reflect that. Yeah,
that all sounds very reasonable, to be honest. I'm interested in the future of education and whether, obviously this is as far as I know, a relatively unique experience for people in terms of your flexibility and class sizes and experience. do you see yourselves as first movers? Is all of education going to head this way in the future, do you think?
Look, I think there will be significant pressure on schools in the future to have a equivalent online model. And, we're speaking to a couple of schools at the moment as to, their interest in using CGA to cater to students who prefer to learn online. So they'd be enrolled in a school, but, might be enrolled with us, simultaneously, potentially, or kind of like a co-branded effort, potentially. You could see a school here in Victoria, Haileybury, who started a private online school as well. They only teach VCE and they only teach Victorian students at the moment, but it's kind of the first big mover in that space to, a school being like, oh, actually, we should. And they're like, we're Victoria's first private school. I'm like, are you though? But, that being said, it's something that I think will grow in popularity, particularly as housing prices become very, very, a challenge for the up and coming generation. Rural regional schools, unfortunately, do not have the same resources that inner city schools have. So families who are moving out of the major cities and who are looking for good education alternatives to the local high school, that makes up a fairly significant portion of our clients. And you'll see that, when we talk about flexibility, workplace attendance, remote work, this type of thing, a lot of those families are in that situation where they've been given flexibility by their company to move, up the coast or whatever it might be. And they're like, well, school's a bit of an issue because there's nothing around here that really appeals to us. And so they'll end up having their kid join CGA.
Got another question from Fred. He's on fire this afternoon. He's got a question around extracurricular leadership activities, and he points at things like school cadet corps and other leadership development opportunities that are outside of the norm. How do you guys address those sorts of things? It's fantastic for the individual, but how do they show leadership potential? What are the avenues for that?
Yeah. I think, to your point, Fred, not individualistic nerds, I think, is a very interesting way of putting it. At CGA, and virtual schools in general, I think it's a really interesting point from a extracurricular standpoint that students very much need to, we're not going to spoon feed them, right? And you'll see at a lot of private schools, they'll throw opportunities left, right, and center at students to try and get them involved in everything from, band to athletics, whatever it might be. And the student would just be like, oh yeah, I'll go along. And they don't necessarily build up any initiative on their own as to what it might look like to put their hand up to ask for something or to get involved in, or to show up on their own accord. And so I think at CGA, you'll see a lot of students who do take initiative in either starting their own club, attending clubs that, they might not know anybody, but they're not being dragged along by one of their mates, grabbing them by the shirt and saying, come on, you come into this club or whatever. They've got to take initiative, which I think is a really key thing that a lot of students lack at private schools here in Australia. Having worked in US, UK admissions as well for 7 years, I see a lot of students who just participate without necessarily turning their own ideas over. So that's a big thing. And I think in terms of individualistic, I would definitely say that's not really the case. Our classes are set up to have a lot of discussion. Usually the quiet kid that you'd see in a physical school can't get away with being the quiet kid at an online school like CGA because we have only 6 or 7 students in the class, right? So you'll often find that we help those quiet, reserved kids come out of their shell. A lot of the extroverted kids, they don't really need that help, but they'll end up being the ones that are going for student leadership positions, doing talks, doing whatever, and really taking initiative in their local community as well. So we very much encourage students to not rely heavily on a school spoon feeding them different opportunities every 5 seconds, but to go out and find things that you can make a difference in your local community for. So we have a volunteers club, for example. We're like, hey, there's actually a lot of things that you can do in your local community that might not necessarily be teacher supervised, but can have you make a big difference and can give you a really great insight into, that leadership and, things that you were talking about there, Fred. So great question. But I do feel private schools have a lot of opportunities, but it's definitely a double-edged sword for a lot of kids.
Yeah, I think one of the things I mentioned there is the Duke of Edinburgh Award, which
Yep.
I've been associated with in the past. I never actually did it, but I kind of wish I had, because that sort of has has a lot of those components. And big shout out to Peter Kay, who's a great friend of mine, who's the CEO of that organisation in Australia. And
I've met with Peter.
yeah, he's a great fellow.
I met with Peter because, a lot of gold students end up wanting to go to the US or UK. We're in the process of figuring out how we would become a Duke of Ed school as well, because there is a lot of paperwork involved. But we're pretty keen to offer that at the very least. I think it's like a really interesting extracurricular that students can get involved in. Yeah, brilliant.
Well, Alex, I haven't got any more questions here, so I'm going to give people 20 seconds to jot your next question in. But thanks. In the interim, I might just start by just thanking you so much for sharing what you're up to and how we can be involved with it. I think it's a fantastic opportunity for people. The flexibility that you're offering, the sort of service level that you're offering. I mean, I'd love to see classrooms of 6 and 7 students. I don't think I'm ever going to see a physical classroom that'll be alongside that or beat that for numbers. And the sort of one-on-one discussions and teaching that you offer really does provide a very different atmosphere for people. Fred's got one more question in. So I'll ask this, and it sounds like this works for bright, self-motivated students. What about the mediocre? Will a parent need to be at home to ensure the student is doing what's required?
I mean, that's really up to you, Fred. I mean, how mediocre are we talking? Generally speaking, we do the admissions, like we have an original or like an initial consultation with families to determine fit. Yes, it works for, your motivated students. They don't necessarily need to be academically bright. They just need to have an interest in learning. We have seen a lot of students who are able to turn around like a disinterest in learning back to having that interest, mainly because the disinterest may have been triggered by either a negative teaching experience that they had at their school or a social reason that they had at their school, that they basically ended up in that school refusal side of things. And at CGA, we see a lot of students turn around and get back into learning when they're with great teachers and they don't have to deal with that social side of things that they may have had issues with. But yeah, I think for the, your quote unquote mediocre students, we have plenty of students who are in that average range, who are not necessarily aiming to get into the top US or UK universities. They really just want to aim locally or, go into trades or whatever it might be. And they just want to get through their high school certificate. And usually sometimes that's like elite athletes we often work with who are not necessarily academically driven. They just want a high school certificate and they need to work around their training schedule, for example. And so we work with those students either in our one-to-one format, or we can sometimes drop them back a class to make sure that academically they're able to get the scores that they ultimately want to achieve whatever they want to achieve. So yeah, it's a wide range of students that we have, not just the academically or motivated, gifted students. We're working with a huge range of students. And as I said, we wouldn't be having the fees that we've got if we weren't confident that we're able to help students turn around their motivation if they are lacking a little bit. And that's what we look for in those initial consultations, is that spark of curiosity, that kind of glimmer of, I used to really like maths, but, I've had some rough trots lately. And if we can help those students, regain that confidence, then, that's a huge win, both for the student and the parents.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. As I said before, Alex, that's been a really terrific session. And I've certainly learnt a lot, and I hope those who have joined us have. We've recorded this session and we're going to put it up online so people can come back or invite others to share it. It'll go out in our newsletter next week as well. So if you have any other further questions, please, Alex's email address is there on the screen. Feel free to visit, obviously, their website as well. And we look forward to hearing about your journey with CGA. Alex, thanks again so much for your time this afternoon. It's been terrific, as I said. For the Chamber this year, stacks of stuff coming up. We went through the event program for February. I'm already I'm already exhausted just reading it. But there's summer drinks almost everywhere around the country. There's International Women's Day events. There'll be stuff on the free trade agreement, which is imminent. It's progressing through the UK Parliament as we speak, and hopefully will be ratified by the end of Q1 or maybe early Q2. But we're getting ahead on all those things. So lots more to come from the Chamber. Just visit our website, britishchamber.com, to see those events that are local. We also have our online Meet the Member, which Alex talked about as something as a great place to connect with other members and share opportunities. So thank you very much again, Alex. Thank you everybody for joining us. Look forward to seeing you all soon, whether that's virtually or in person soon. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, David.